So, Secretary Granholm, stepping back a little from these projects, more broadly on clean energy and security, it's been a big year of U.S. leadership. What would you say are major accomplishments and milestones?
Well, certainly in the energy space. First of all, thank you so much for doing this, and I'm so excited that we've got, you guys are students, right? Or no? You're not. I thought you were like nuclear students. They're nuclear professionals. It's the t-shirt that threw me. But bottom line is, we want to incentivize via activity like you guys are doing in Wyoming for folks to study nuclear energy, to have become nuclear engineers, and to see this clean power as the future. So, we want to do that in the United States, and we have now come to COP with a suite of technology incentives for nuclear that are very exciting. So, number one, we want to keep the existing nuclear online. So there's a $6 billion civil nuclear credit for plants that were otherwise going to close down to keep them online. We want to keep those clean, the clean power going where we have it. Number two is the investment in next generation nuclear. So these advanced demonstration projects are critical. That's $2.5 billion that we are investing to make sure that these, in partnership, make sure these technologies can be taken to scale and ultimately, obviously, deployed not just in the U.S. but across the world. And then the third piece, which is really important, is to incentivize either the building of reactors or, take your pick, the production of the nuclear power. So an investment tax credit and a production tax credit to be able to get, nuclear power companies in the game. And so all three of those are very significant for the United States. And I think that one of the things that is beneficial from this suite of technologies that have been incentivized through the Inflation Reduction Act, which is where that nuclear credit comes from, is that nuclear power, people understand atoms now as being a really important piece of the clean energy future. And because these advanced reactors, I think, take a bit of the fear away, and rightfully they should, and in the United States, and I know in Canada as well, there's a very strict regulatory environment. You can't get over the hurdle of certification unless you really have abided by all the regulatory rules. We have a gold standard, I think, in the United States. But in addition to that, that's for existing, but also for future reactors. But I think people see the SMRs and the advanced reactors as being a little bit different. Therefore, nuclear is finding its way, I think, back into real acceptance and enthusiasm, and I think that's very exciting.
Thanks, Secretary Granholm. Also this fall, I had the pleasure of joining you at the Global Clean Energy Action Forum in Luxembourg and at the IAEA Nuclear Power Ministerials. Do you have any thoughts to share on some of the momentum that was built in those forums?
Well, I think it's not just the United States, not just Canada, and it's really the globe that is looking at these opportunities. And I think that, unfortunately, Russia's invasion of Ukraine has really heightened the importance of energy independence. And particularly in Eastern Europe, there has been a real commitment to nuclear power, to becoming a center of nuclear power. And so I think that we are at this moment where there's a real, not just openness, but eagerness to have clean baseload power, to be energy independent and energy secure, therefore, from Russia, or, and I say this with all clean energy, any country with who, values you may not share, or who is acting in an unacceptable manner globally. So I think these national and global forums, the global forums that you're talking about, really help to accelerate the push on energy security and the acceptance of this baseload power. And it's the baseload part that also has just obviously such attraction. We want to push as much as we can renewable energy as well, but we know that until we completely get the storage piece corrected, less baseload light. We want it to become more baseload light, but zero carbon emitting power that is reliable is absolutely in demand globally, and that's, I think, what the lessons are that have come out of those international fora. Can I flip the script on you? Because I'm wondering what you're seeing. I mean, I know there's been interest in a variety of advanced and small reactors, and from your perspective, TerraPower, et cetera, what do you see the openness now to these different kind of reactors, the Natrium reactor, for example, as being different in kind than perhaps the more traditional AP1000 types of reactors?
Oh, we're definitely seeing signs there. Thank you, Secretary. We're definitely seeing signs there of interest in current technology and advanced nuclear technology. And I just want to mention, we have 92 current technology reactors operating in the U.S. that are very safe, and about 400 fission reactors around the world. And even before you talk about advanced nuclear technology, I think this year, following the Russian attack on Ukraine, people have thought a lot more about the value of nuclear energy, period, because of some of its attributes. When you load fuel into today's reactors, it's a source of energy for 2 years. It's a source of heat for Europe for 2 winters. And people are seeing that attribute of nuclear, that you can't interrupt that energy supply by interrupting a pipeline or a rail line. So we need today's reactors to keep running for sure as part of energy security. And then, when it comes to advanced nuclear, we've been working on that for both climate reasons, but also population growth reasons. But again, people are super interested in the attributes of advanced nuclear. In Wyoming, we'll go back to the U.S. for a moment. They're really interested in our plant like Natrium because it can change its power very quickly. Because it has built-in energy storage, which lets it, really operate in tandem with the vast amount of wind in the Mountain West in a really effective way. But one thing about these reactors as well is we hear a lot about the off-site power needs at plants like Zaporizhzhia, and these new reactors, our design and others, won't need that off-site power supply to assure their safety case. So we really need today's reactors to stay online, but these new ones have great benefits that we need to go get.
Yeah, exciting.
So, Secretary Granholm, we were talking about just international, concerns about security and growing energy needs. Are there any particular international announcements that the U.S. has been part of that you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, we just talked about Romania. Very exciting that in Romania and in Poland, we just announced the partnership with Poland. They selected Westinghouse's AP1000 for the first series of reactors. They will for their first nuclear plant altogether. And for us, it's a $40 billion project overall in Poland, and that creates obviously jobs in Poland and energy security in Poland, but it also creates a huge amount of jobs in the United States as well. So there's benefits for both countries, and we're very excited about that. And we, as I was saying, we think Eastern Europe is really just to be the center of next generation nuclear, and could also use it for their own power, but also be exporting to the rest of Europe, especially as we see now, that would be very beneficial. Obviously, this takes a while to be able to build AP1000s and any kind of nuclear these days, but nonetheless, for the future, it's a really important resiliency play.
Thank you. Thank you, Secretary Granholm. So the recent IPCC report and a number of other new policy frameworks are suggesting that to reach net zero, we're going to need to double or triple nuclear energy. And I know in the U.S. we're very focused on how do we prepare the supply chain, the workforce, and the fuel supply for that. If you could share some of that, I think it's a great example for other nations as well.
Yeah, clearly we are concerned about the supply chain in many ways. So, for example, we have two reactors that will be coming online in Georgia, global plants. The building of those allowed for us to create a supply chain, very important. But the big supply chain that we're concerned about, one of the big supply chains, is making sure we have enough fuel. And so we just announced, for example, Dr. Katie Huff, who runs our nuclear energy office, announced the awarding of $150 million for the development of high-assay low-enriched uranium, HALEU, and we want to make sure that we develop that in the United States so that we are not reliant upon Russia or other suppliers. But that's true with low-enriched uranium as well. We want to make sure that we are doing the full suite of fuel, but also of supply chains. And I know other countries are concerned about this as well. And for us, can you hear? It's so loud, isn't it? Can you guys hear? You can hear, all right. So the bottom line is both on supply chains in the U.S., on being a reliable partner for supply chains globally, I think it's important. And on the energy security piece, I think because of what has happened, obviously Russia has been a large nuclear power provider and providing reactors across the globe. But they've now shown that they are not a trustworthy partner. And so it is important for those who are contemplating nuclear power to be able to feel confident in the partners that they select, that you do not want to pick a partner who could end up weaponizing, for example, energy or the supply in some way, shape, or form. And that's why this sort of realignment that is happening around energy globally is really important, particularly when it comes to nuclear. You just have to make sure that your partners are strong partners. And in the United States, we're very interested in pursuing, for example, the additional protocol with our 1, 2, 3 agreements with other countries so that we can make sure that we are all comfortable with the non-proliferation aspects of nuclear power. And that, to me, and the IAEA's leadership on this has been tremendous. To me, those are very important parts of a country's consideration of whether they will be adopting nuclear energy. And we want to be that partner.
Well, Secretary Granholm, TerraPower and the other American companies really appreciate our partnership with the U.S. government. And just to give you an idea what that partnership looks like, the Secretary mentioned Assistant Secretary Huff, who's in charge of nuclear energy and works for the Secretary. She and I talk very frequently about the needs of our project in Wyoming, including the fuel supply needs. And just want our international audience to visualize what that cooperation looks like. And that cooperation doesn't, exist just in the U.S. It also involves the State Department. We were really proud on Saturday with Special Envoy John Kerry to announce Project Phoenix. And NuScale was present for that, along with TerraPower and Ambassador Holgate from the IAEA. And that was all about using American nuclear technology to repurpose coal plants across Europe and help get Europe off Russian energy supply. So we were proud to make that announcement.
This is why your project is so irresistible, is because it addresses several issues, right? And the notion of a just transition and the ability for people to be trained to work in a facility where they will get good wages, and they've powered this nation for the past, or they've powered, at least in the U.S., our nation for the past 100 years. They should be able to power the U.S. for the next 100 years, just using a different form of energy. And the fact that there is a training component, that there is a security of job component, and that it's on a facility that was shutting down. And there's so many of those all across the world. So what you guys are providing an example of is really just a beautiful way to transition to clean that doesn't threaten people's livelihoods.
Secretary Granholm, we know you have to go on to another meeting soon. We really appreciate the time you spent with us. After you leave, we're going to have a panel discussion with some of the nuclear energy associations from around North America and Europe. And before we say goodbye to you, I wonder if you could give the nuclear industry a charge or give us some advice.
Look, you got the incentives. Let's do this. You've got the framework, and now we just need the power. So, we will be your partner. We want to make sure your supply chains are secure. We will work on that with you, alongside you. This is true for our other North American allies, the Canadian, I just want to make sure I get it, the Canadian Nuclear Association as well, and Nucleareurope. Same thing. We want to be partners in clean, and we are now providing the incentives to make it happen. So let's just do it. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Secretary Granholm.
Chris, thank you so much. I hope you all are as enthusiastic about our future as I am, hearing Secretary Granholm's remarks. It's now up to us to just do it. Chris, thank you so much for speaking with the Secretary here. I would like to invite Jonathan Cobb from the World Nuclear Association to please come to the stage. He will be the moderator for our second session. Jonathan, I do have to tell you, you're a little taller than I am, so you'll probably have to hunch over a little bit more than me to be picked up by this mic. So please welcome, and I will turn the program over to you.
Thanks very much, Carol, and thank you everybody who's here today. We are going to have representatives of a variety of different nuclear trade associations appearing very shortly on the stage. But before that, we want to go beyond North America and Europe and hear from representatives from around the world. So we're about to have a video in which we'll hear from Jorge Svetanek, who is from the Latin American section of the North American Nuclear Society. Too many A's and N's, media COVID. But first of all, we'll hear from Arashiro, who's president of the Japan Atomic Industrial Forum. Please play the video.
Currently, the world faces two major crises: the instability of energy supply due to increasing geopolitical risks and climate change. I firmly believe that nuclear power can contribute greatly to overcoming those two crises from the perspective of stable supply, given that is an established technology that is the most reliable, and the fact that it is robust, economically efficient, and environmentally sustainable. Japan declared that it would aim to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050, and it announced its goal by fiscal 2030 to reduce greenhouse emissions by 46% from the level of fiscal 2013. With the political acceleration of climate change countermeasures, Japan's strategic energy plan was revised in October 2021, stating that the use of renewable energy is to be maximized, while also specifically indicating that nuclear power is to be used on a necessary scale. As of 2030, nuclear power's share of the total power generation mix would be 20 to 22%. To meet this goal, we will need all of the 27 nuclear power plants already applied for safety review by the regulatory authority. Currently, there are 36 operable nuclear power plants in Japan, including those under construction. Since the giant earthquake of March 2011, 10 nuclear power plants have successfully been restarted. In light of the government's carbon neutral policy by 2050 and the recent surge in energy prices, industries exposed to international competition have expressed strong hopes for the restart of nuclear power plants, as they offer a stable supply of electricity at low generation costs. Japan's supply and demand situation for electricity is expected to remain tight this winter. Behind this, Japan is experiencing the prolonged shutdown of nuclear power plants, for meeting the new regulatory standard. Consequently, there has been a significant increase in demand by the industries to accelerate the nuclear power plants restarting process. Currently, the Japanese government is promoting GX, a green transformation policy, measures to transform the entire economic and social system of the country into one centered on clean energy towards the realization of the goal of carbon neutrality by 2050. Last August, Prime Minister Kishida, who chairs the GX Implementation Council, concluded renewable energy and nuclear power are decarbonized energies that are indispensable in advancing the green transformation. And in order to strengthen options for the future, concrete conclusions such as an institutional framework should be drawn up at the end of the year. At the Council, the ministry in charge reported that in addition to the 10 nuclear power plants that are currently in operation, they will strive to restart the 7 plants that have already been permitted for restart. In addition, it was decided that the ministry concerned will study measures to maximize the use of nuclear power generation, such as extending the operation period and to develop and construct next-generation innovative reactors. It is basically a policy move that should be welcomed by the nuclear industry. It is important for Japan to proceed with the decommissioning of the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power station and the reconstruction of Fukushima. In parallel with this, we will contribute to the realization of carbon neutrality by 2050 by maximizing the use of nuclear power, which is a decarbonized energy indispensable for promoting green transformation. As an immediate issue, we will continue our efforts to steadily advance the restart of nuclear power plants. And in addition, we would like to contribute to decarbonization of the world by promoting nuclear power in cooperation with overseas nuclear industry associations. Thank you for your attention.
Hello, everybody. My name is George Spitalnik, and I am talking to you from Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. Today, I will talk about issues that will affect the reliable supply of energy under the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Projections on the increase in world population indicate that our planet will reach about 9.2 billion inhabitants by 2040. Much of this increase will be established in urban centers. 2 billion people will be living in cities where large conglomerates of energy demand will be concentrated. Due to the increasing concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, increasingly electricity will be used, and this will drastically reduce combustion as the most utilized process to generate energy. A significant reduction in combustion processes from fossil sources will be necessary, and this will lead to the replacement of fossil fuels by sources that do not emit greenhouse gases, such as renewable sources, as well as nuclear sources, fossil fuels with carbon capture also. How will this affect sustainability? Current technologies for solar, photovoltaic, and wind energy require a large number of units per installed megawatt. This implies an extremely large amount of materials per kilowatt hour produced. And there is great concern about the possibility of early depletion of minerals. Let me now talk about baseload energy. The stability of the transmission lines by keeping the electric frequency constant is a necessary condition. Frequency variations deriving from the inability to meet demand at a given time may create blackouts. This problem could come up due to the intermittency of renewable sources. The existence of firm base load energy guarantees a constant electric frequency. Now, regarding energy security and national sovereignty, we can observe that the recent situation resulting from the conflicts among European nations has highlighted the importance of security of energy supply. In particular, countries that, having developed and mastered the engineering and technology of nuclear power, and then decided to replace these sources with renewables and imported energy, were left in a situation of energy insecurity. Nowadays, energy independence is essential for the full exercise of the sovereign decision power of a nation. And this is the end of my presentation, and I thank you for your kind attention.
So those videos will be available on our website after this event if you want to listen to them again. But now I'd like to take the opportunity to invite the panelists for the rest of the session, who are Sama Bilbao-Elion, who's Director General of World Nuclear Association, John Gorman, President and CEO of the Canadian Nuclear Association, Yves Desbazet, Director General, Nucleareurope, and Carol Berrigan from the Nuclear Energy Institute. Please, will you take the stage? Thank you. We heard earlier on the challenge that came from Secretary Gernholm. She asked us to do it. So in the opening remarks, I'd be very grateful to hear from you. What is it that we have to do? What is it? So if I can turn to Sama, perhaps you've got some opening remarks you'd like to give. Sama.
Thank you, Jonathan, and thank you everybody for being here. So we've been challenged by our Secretary Gernholm to see what the nuclear industry can deliver. So the good news to me is that obviously the nuclear industry has a very good record of delivering historically the fastest decarbonization that we have seen in many countries, whether it is France, Sweden, Spain, and clearly recently in the UAE, has been due to nuclear energy. So, and of course, we are seeing countries today that are moving very quickly to develop nuclear energy, such as China. So the question now is whether we can do the same in the rest of the global nuclear industry. So we have now a few demonstration projects that are coming up in the next few years, certainly well before the decade, and I think this is an opportunity for the global nuclear industry to invest in itself. We really need to develop the infrastructures that are going to make our industry to be successful. So what do I mean by infrastructures? I mean, first of all, the supply chain. Secretary Gernholm talked about that. We need to develop this supply chain at a global level. Also, we need to make sure that we have the human resources that are going to support this very fast growth of nuclear that we need at a global level. And then last but not least, the institutional infrastructure. And we are talking here about the regulatory frameworks, the finance, the policy. So that's what the industry is going to do, and this is what we are going to do to make sure that before the end of this decade, we are ready to actually hit the ground running when all these demonstration projects are successful. And then, of course, what I would say to Secretary Gernholm, if she was here, is that for that we do need the support of policymakers. We do need bold, pragmatic policies that are going to provide transparency and visibility to the nuclear industry, so we know that the investment that we are doing in our industry is going to be appreciated and is going to be continued for the longer term. I'll stop here.
Thank you very much, Sama. John, if I can invite you to make your opening response and remarks.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. I'm sort of taking the old school approach here, and I've taken so many notes that I can't figure out what it was I was supposed to say anymore. So this may be as entertaining for all of you as it may be for me. I'm not sure. But let me start by saying, you know, as we meet this energy challenge, every nation is dealing with its own set of unique challenges that are going to be met by varying combinations of clean energy technologies. And you know, in Canada's case, because of course I'm from Canada, I'm with the Canadian Nuclear Association. We come from a very large country with a small population, which is in a northern climate. And our electricity system is already pretty clean, right? It's about 82%, 83% non-emitting. So when we look at the energy challenge and trying to reduce our emissions, we don't look at the low-hanging fruit right away of decarbonizing the rest of our electricity system the way that, for example, the United States is doing. We have to look at our natural resource intensive economy. We have to look at heavy industry, and we have to grapple with the challenge of not only how to double or triple the amount of clean electricity we produce, but how is it we're going to be able to use clean energy to decarbonize these very hard to abate sectors in the natural resource and heavy industry side of things. And that is where we're seeing on both of those fronts nuclear playing a very important role. So Canada is, I think, acknowledged to be a leader over 6 decades in as a tier 1 nation for nuclear power. And there are some successes here along with the challenges. Firstly, you know, nuclear provides a lot of our clean electricity, but it's on the basis of that nuclear presence, especially in Ontario, that we were able to phase out coal-fired electricity in a very short period of time and replace over 80% of the coal-fired generation with incremental nuclear. It's the single biggest carbon reduction initiative in North America and perhaps the world. But we're also going through the refurbishment of those nuclear plants now. And I bring that up because there are 2 very important opportunities on the electricity side. One is we have the opportunity now through the refurbishments and this very healthy nuclear ecosystem to actually increase the output of our existing assets. And when you consider, you know, one of those plants, the first power plant, 6.3 gigawatts, the largest nuclear plant in the world, through the refurbishments, they're looking at probably getting an extra gigawatt thanks to digitalization and other improvements that are going through the refurbishments. Secondly, it's on top of this very healthy nuclear ecosystem that Canada truly is a world leader in the development and deployment of small modular reactors. So I'm just going to bring this back to Canada's other challenge, which is how do we decarbonize heavy industry and natural resources? It's using these 4th generation small modular reactors, the high temperature heat, to be able to use that heat in industrial processes while at the same time creating hydrogen and decarbonizing electricity. So I think nuclear has a very important role to play in the Canadian context based on its history and based on the innovation we're doing.
Thanks very much, John. And that point about decarbonising sectors of electricity is something I'd like to come back to later on. But now if I could turn the floor to Yves, please.
Thank you, Jonathan. Maybe I will start with an announcement, which is that a joint statement has been issued earlier today. And this is a joint statement from all organizations, so namely CNA, JAIF, NEI, NIA, Romatom, WNA, and Nucleareurope. We highlight the critical role of nuclear in current crisis, and we call for recognition of its low carbon features. Also, we call for policy makers to include nuclear in the low carbon technologies, and also encourage research and development. So I think it's an important step forward we made here. So now, a few words on Europe. So I think in Europe, the credential of nuclear is, I would say, something which has been really confirmed over the years, and we have today roughly 25% of electricity being produced by nuclear. It has reached a figure up to 30% in the early 2000s. So the figure is gradually decreasing today. This is unfortunately the trend we have, but we have to reverse this. We produce 50% of low carbon generation, and we have, as I was saying, to replace this fleet, even with long-term operation, which we are implementing as well in some countries. There is clearly a need to look at replacement. So we believe that replacement will be a combination of large reactors, because they are, I would say, really available in the market, and in some countries there is no time to lose. Here, I have invited, for example, Poland. It's clear that Poland needs urgently to decarbonize its economy. And then we need also SMRs. I think this was already discussed before. And SMRs can also be an excellent choice to also decarbonize hard-to-abate sectors. So this was said, also mentioned by John. I think on that, everybody should be aware that the need is absolutely massive. And this is where always a little bit puzzled when I see some sort of people opposing nuclear or renewable or anything else. I think we need everything. We need everything all together, because the step to cross is so major. If I take the numbers in Europe, we are talking about a need that would be a need of low carbon energy and not only power. So this is, for example, where SMRs will be needed. The need is to multiply by 3 the equivalent of the low carbon of electricity generation today, including producing heat, producing hydrogen, and obviously power. So I think on that we have to be aware that we have an immense challenge in front of us. And I don't think we need to even oppose technologies in nuclear, because at the end of the day, we need everything. My last point is clearly on policy making. So unfortunately today we don't have the support we've seen, for instance, from State Secretary from the United States. We have some commissioners around here in COP27. I don't think they have even pronounced the N word. So it shows that we are very far from having any support from policymakers, and clearly this has to change. So I think on that we've heard a positive speech from Commissioner Simpson last Friday in Prague, but I think the actions to be implemented are still, and concrete action is still to be seen, unfortunately.
Thanks very much, Yves. If I could now turn to Carol. Carol, the NEI is perhaps going to be in the spotlight the most to respond to the challenge from the Secretary. So I'll be interested to hear your views. Thank you.
Thanks, Jonathan. So I'd like to start with just a reflection generally on COP27 and nuclear here at COP. And I have to say, the conversation around nuclear energy and climate is so fundamentally different than it was just 10 years ago. It's clear now that nuclear will play an essential role in building the world's clean energy future. And I just want to let that sink in a little bit, because it really relates to the challenge that Secretary Granholm mentioned about just doing it and getting out there and deploying. And so when I think about this, and I think about nuclear energy, I think about not the demand, because I think the demand is coming. We're hearing about it in announcement after announcement around the globe. I think what we need to think about as an industry is, are we getting ourselves ready to deploy and meet this moment? And I think, we really need to think about what that means. We're not talking about demand for 10 or 20 reactors. My organization, the Nuclear Energy Institute, recently surveyed chief nuclear officers at our member utilities. Together, they said that they were expecting to expand and add about 90 gigawatts of nuclear power on the grid in the US. Let that sink in, 90 gigawatts. The bulk of that coming online by 2050. If you do the math, that translates to about 300 small modular reactors in the next 25 years, which would double our nuclear capacity that we have today. So just let that sink in for a moment with the opportunity that's before us and the scale of the challenge. Now, adding to that, when you think about this opportunity, is that this estimate only includes utilities that are NEI members, which means the utilities that are already operating nuclear plants. This doesn't include all of the other applications of nuclear that we'll be talking about as we further work to decarbonize our economies and we start to electrify more and more. So that the scope of the opportunity is just really huge. And then I think a little bit back to Secretary Granholm's remarks as she was talking about good paying jobs and workforce. And I think about, in the next decade, constructing and operating nuclear plants around the world will support hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of good paying jobs. And I look at the representatives here of North American Young Generation in Nuclear, who are our young professional society, and I think about the American Nuclear Society members who are here at COP with us, and just think about the opportunities that are there for them in the future. And as this hunger for nuclear grows, so we'll need deeper expertise, we'll need more of a workforce, and this will expand really the opportunities for workers. Let's see, where else do I want to take this? So those would be the big pieces I'd start with. But then I'd also remind us as a nuclear community that we are seeing stronger and stronger support now. You heard Secretary Granholm from the United States speaking about nuclear and giving us really a charge to move forward. As we hear the announcements and conversations in other pavilions, the other announcements around the world, we need to keep in mind that we have to keep talking with policymakers. We need to keep engaging with the media, engaging with the public, with a wide range of audiences. We need to connect with financial institutions and investors and ensure that they fully understand the opportunity and the benefits of nuclear before us. We also need to be reaching out, as I said, to the workforce and students to encourage the next generation of workers for all of our industry. I think I'll stop there, Jonathan, with just sort of a focus on that, keeping the conversation going and understanding the potentially huge opportunity before us.
Thank you very much, Carol. Now, to address the subject of this event, which is meeting the energy challenge and what nuclear's role in that, I'd like to ask a question to each of the panelists, but after each panelist's response, if any of you want to make an additional comment, please just let me know. We'll be interested to hear it. And we will be coming to the audience for questions a little later before we end. I want to make sure we have time for that. But Eve, if I could just turn to you first. This is COP. Tackling climate change remains a key priority, but there's a growing focus on ensuring that sustainable sources of energy, both from an environmental and society perspective, are used. Can nuclear be considered as sustainable, and if so, why?
So on that, I think many of you have in mind the European taxonomy file, which has been on the top of our agenda for the last 2 years, and it successfully was adopted last July. And this taxonomy file includes nuclear as a sustainable source of energy, which we believe it's a very nice step forward. This decision was based on a full scientific analysis from the Joint Research Center of the Commission, a 400 pages paper study that shows that nuclear is not more does not more harm to environment than other eligible technologies to the taxonomy. So I think we have an excellent, I would say, an excellent basis for building up on that for further policy initiative, because it's only one step further, and we need to see now nuclear being included in many other initiatives from the institutions, so that we can have the stability and the political support that this industry needs to develop its capacities. As we were saying before, the needs are massive and we need everything all together on the table.
Thanks. If I go to Samba, please.
Well, I of course agree with what Eve just said, but maybe I wanted to take it a step further. So yes, nuclear energy can be considered sustainable, of course, but I think it's very important we also consider the very important role of nuclear energy supporting sustainable development. And you know, we are here in Africa, but we are at a COP meeting, so this is a very interesting mix, because while the primary focus of our discussions is decarbonization, the reality is Africa and African countries are in fact much more interested in energizing. So what they need first is to go in a transition from no energy to energy. And then they will actually, hopefully, we will support them to make sure that that is as sustainable as possible. But again, the primary goal here is to, first of all, end energy scarcity and make sure that everybody here in Africa and in South and Central America and Southeast Asia and many other countries in the world have the access to abundant, affordable, clean, 24/7 energy that they need to do that. So I think that that component, the sustainable development, is very important. We need to go beyond decarbonization.
Thank you, Samba. And John.
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan. I'll just touch quickly. I'm glad that Eve brought up the EU taxonomy and the sort of indicators that they put against that taxonomy, because when you dive into it, you can see all of the reasons that nuclear really is sustainable. But I wanted to touch on the waste issue for just a moment, because it's the primary reason that detractors of nuclear call nuclear not sustainable. There is a great news story behind the way that nuclear manages its waste. And as an industry, we have to get out there and tell that story better. It's not just the fact that nuclear waste has never, in the history of nuclear, harmed, let alone killed anyone. And there's a reason for that, by the way. It's because it is very straightforward to store waste and handle it safely for storage. But having been in the renewables industry for about 20 years, I can tell you that nuclear is the only industry that is accountable for every particle of waste it produces through the entire life cycle, and prepays for its safe storage and management, and in many nations' cases, including Canada, for a permanent waste solution. There are a lot of other elements to this story in terms of why the nuclear waste story is a positive one. I've just touched on a couple, but it's something that as an industry we really need to get out there and start challenging the other energy industries to try to match the high regulated, prepaid, safe, reliable management and storage of waste the way the nuclear industry does.
Carol, would you like to add something?
Sure, I'll just add one additional aspect. As we're thinking about sustainability, one of the things that's been a conversation that we've had, and I think, John, you moderated a conversation on this late last week, is we can't forget the human aspect. As we're thinking about transitioning our economies from fossil-based, from coal, we have to think about the people and the communities and how they're impacted, and that's directly related to sustainability. And so, as Secretary Granholm and Chris Levesque were talking a little bit about before in the first part of the session, the ability of nuclear to replace retiring coal facilities, I think, is an aspect that we shouldn't miss. It helps keep communities alive with economic development, with jobs, with all of those important things that are so critical to a truly just transition. And not just any jobs. Nuclear jobs tend to be very well paying. If you've ever been to a nuclear plant and had an opportunity to walk around, these are really amazing facilities. They are very safe, they are very clean, and the workforce at these facilities is highly trained and then compensated for that expertise. So I just wanted to share that piece, the transferability of jobs and skill sets between retiring coal plants and nuclear plants. There's a high degree of matching there. So a very good opportunity for people who have grown up in communities and where their facility may close, having an opportunity with a new nuclear plant that may be located there. And you heard Chris Levesque talk a little bit about TerraPower's plans in this space. So I'll leave it there, Jonathan, and turn it back to you.
Thanks very much, Caroline. In fact, I'd like now to go back to something that John touched on the issue of decarbonising sectors other than the electricity generation sector. And if I could ask you, Sama, increased electrification is one way of helping to decarbonise the energy we use. However, there are many sectors where we cannot fully electrify the so-called hard to decarbonise sectors. What other solutions can nuclear bring to help decarbonise these sectors?
Yes, no, thank you, Jonathan, and obviously John started this discussion. So this is one in my mind of the great opportunities that nuclear energy brings, because as I said before, we can decarbonize the entire economy. Yes, we can produce zero carbon electricity, great, and that is going to be very helpful as we electrify as much as possible of the economy. But the good news is that nuclear energy, in addition to this low carbon electricity, we can produce low carbon heat. And this heat is going to be essential for all these industries. So, for example, existing reactors and also, in particular, advanced reactors, small modular reactors, micro reactors, they are very well suited to provide heat, for example, for industrial applications. So we can use this heat for process heating in many industries, whether there is steel making, whether it is cement making, the pharmaceutical industry, chemical industries. There is many opportunities to use this heat to actually decarbonize this industry. Also, and this is also something that is happening right now in many countries, we can use the excess heat that is produced in a nuclear power plant for decarbonizing district and heating in nearby areas. So this is something that is happening, as I said, already. And the good news is these advanced technologies like small modular reactors could be even more uh, effective to decarbonize these areas. But then again, let's not forget that there are many other things that are going to require a lot of energy. So, like for example, fresh water. We know that as we see the effects of climate change, we are going to need to get fresh water from salt water. So this is another very excellent application of nuclear energy that has been done for decades and obviously can continue to be done. But now let's move forward to other things that are a little bit even more in depth. So, like for example, it is possible to use nuclear energy to produce hydrogen, to produce ammonia, to produce synthetic fuels, and this opens yet many new opportunities because now we can help decarbonize very difficult to abate sectors. For example, the shipping industries, the air transport industries, the marine transport industries. So these are opportunities that are uniquely suited for these advanced reactors, small modular reactors that are going to help us in some cases use directly these technologies in the shipping industries, for example, in the marine shipping industries, or perhaps we can use the existing infrastructure by dropping in synthetic fuels that are zero carbon created through nuclear energy into the existing mobile shipping industries. So again, many opportunities that nuclear energy can bring to decarbonize, as I said, the entire economy.
Thanks, Emma. John, do you have something to add?
Just to say that I'm really glad that Sama flagged some of the alternative uses outside of energy that nuclear is important for. Some of you mentioned fresh water, for example, but when it comes right down to it, nuclear has a role to play in every single one of the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Indicators, and it's worth exploring on that front. But what I want to add, Jonathan, is just, I know we've been sort of focusing here on SMRs, but you know, in the Canadian context, where as a nation we have really made a bid to become one of the world-leading economies in hydrogen, we're doing a pretty deep dive into how hydrogen is produced, as Emma was talking about, and at least the link between nuclear and hydrogen. And one of the most promising opportunities in Canada is actually using the power from our conventional reactors to produce hydrogen and looking at some of the opportunities there. So of the 5 major projects in the nuclear space that we've identified with our federal government, Bruce Power's plant is one of the 5 looking at now going through the feasibility study of producing hydrogen using our conventional electrolysis from the baseload power. So I think that's worth mentioning.
Thanks very much. Do you want to add something, Nick?
No, I think I fully agree with what was said by John and Sama. Just for illustration, I would like to give 1 or 2 figures because I think it's important to have this in mind. In terms of challenges that I would say decarbonizing the industry means in terms of numbers. So, for instance, for example, in Europe, when we talk about district heating, it's 500 terawatt hours. So, to be compared to the 3,000 terawatt hours of electricity being consumed and produced in Europe today, so it means that it's a sixth of this. When we are looking now at industrial heat, it's more than 1,000, so it's 1,250 watt hours. So this is a very significant number as well. And hydrogen, the objectives of Europe for 2030 of 20 million ton hydrogen, fully decarbonized hydrogen, it's 1,000 terawatt hours, equivalent of 120 gigawatt of installed nuclear capacity, to be compared to the 100 we have today. So I think with those numbers, we see I would say the mountain that has to be climbed, and this is absolutely messy. So we really have to work with intensive users as an industry to help them in addressing all those challenges.
Thanks very much, Yves. And to keep us on time and set for completion on schedule, this will be the last question before I come to the audience here for questions. I'd like to turn back to you if I can, John, and raise the issue of security of energy supply. It is of growing concern. I wonder if you could share your thoughts on how nuclear can help tackle this issue.
Yes, thank you, Jonathan. So I'll try to be brief and just stick to one topic, even though I've got 6 here. And I think what I'll do is I'll focus on energy security or energy independence from a fuel perspective. You know, the invasion of Ukraine by Russia obviously has shifted the world discussion towards energy security and how it is we're going to come off of reliance of Russian fossil fuel, but fossil fuel and the world network for supplying fossil fuels is a pretty volatile thing, right? And the issue around creating any sort of energy from fossil fuels is that you need a constant stream of it, which means if your fuel supply is interrupted, you really can't continue to operate, which is why we're seeing some of the effects that both Sama and Eve were alluding to in Europe right now, of course. But with nuclear fuel, while it's still dependent on international relations and supply and a network of things, it's quite a bit different, right? These conventional reactors generally have, at least 3 years of fuel stored on site. So firstly, you don't just turn off the tap as you might turn off a gas supply to a nation. And that provides a certain level of stability in itself. Not to mention the fact that, fuel is, by ratio, a very, very small percentage of the operation of a nuclear plant. And that not only provides price protection in terms of price fluctuations with uranium, because it is such a small percentage, but it also means, in our case, that the amount of fuel that is required is very small. And when you extend that out to small modular reactors, some of these technologies don't actually have to be refueled for 5 to 10 years, right? So it's a different proposition. And the last thing I'd say about this, I know as a world we're scrambling to ensure we have a good supply of all different types of uranium fuel right now and get away from Russia, but we have been protected a little bit by this dynamic that I just spoke to. We have a little bit of time to be able to adjust and ensure that independence. So the last thing I'll say is, nuclear can be built almost anywhere. It's not reliant on the water resource you have or even your wind or solar regimes. It can be built anywhere, which gives independence. And now the good news is it's also scalable, so you can get it in any size. So I think those are a couple of the important issues.
Thanks, John. Any further comments on that? Harold, please.
I just want to take this in a slightly different direction. I agree with everything that John said about the energy security sort of fundamental nature of nuclear, but I think there's another piece of this as we're looking geopolitically and we're looking at the kinds of policy support that is coming to nuclear. And I think this is a very important thing because when we think about the technologies necessary to address climate change, the mandate by our societies for energy security. So Sama talked a little bit about energy access that's critical in places that don't have access today. And in addition to that, countries that have access, maintaining that access in not only a reliable way, but an affordable way for populations, nuclear can play a critical role there. So as we're thinking about energy security, not only the physical aspects of nuclear providing this, but also when nuclear is part of a clean energy mix, it's more affordable. It increases reliability. It enhances energy security. You heard Secretary Granholm earlier talking about Poland moving forward with nuclear energy with their first reactors, and also Romania expanding their fleet of nuclear reactors. That's all a really important part of this energy security conversation, where nuclear really hits that sweet spot of climate, energy security, and for countries here in Africa, energy access as well.
Thanks very much, Carol. Sama, did you want to add?
Yeah, so I think that Carol just brought something that is essential, which is obviously we need to have the framework for this energy security, and having the right mix of technologies is very important. But I want to touch something in which we really need to have a lot of work, and it's in my mind the issue of the markets. So we see that right now the global energy markets tend to be are very dysfunctional. I mean, clearly many of you, certainly I, are seeing the dysfunction in my monthly bill. So that is something that is very close to everybody's heart. but it's more than that. So we have markets that do not recognize the value of reliability, the value of stability, the value of energy independence, the value of the overall system costs are included in the price of the electricity or the energy. So I think that one of the things that we need to do beyond all this, making sure that we have well-balanced energy mix, is to go back a little bit to the drawing board. Governments, policymakers, they need to be bold and pragmatic and go back to the drawing board and redesign or reassess how the policy, the markets need to, in fact, incentivize long-term planning, incentivize an energy mix that is going to be diverse and secure, incentivize long-term planning and investment.
Thanks very much, Sama. So now is the opportunity, if you'd like, to pose questions to our panelists today. I know there is a microphone that's ready to go. You may need some assistance with getting that microphone to you, but if you have an interest in raising a question at this time, could you please raise your hand? If not, I have more questions to ask. Okay, in that case, I'll move on to the next question on the schedule. And that is to look, Carol, perhaps if you could start this one, if that's possible, please. We heard the challenge to us from the Secretary, but that was talking about nuclear, and really, if we are going to achieve decarbonisation, we're going to need nuclear and all the other low-carbon options in all the other sectors. So how can policy support the development of all low-carbon technologies, including nuclear and all the rest, which are what we're going to need to get us to where we want to be in 2050?
Thanks, Jonathan. That's a great question, and it's really an important question for us as well. We start talking about some of the policy support that's out there that includes nuclear in the end goal of clean energy. So we heard Eve talk a little bit about the EU taxonomy, which has included nuclear energy within its definition. We look just north of the US to Canada for their green bonds and some recent tax policies that have been put in place that recognize small modular reactors as clean. We look at policies that are in place in the ROK, and then I look at home in the US, and I can tell you from where we're sitting, we are finally seeing clear pro-nuclear policy signals across the political and geographic spectrum. We're seeing them at the state level. 10 years ago, you would have been lucky to see even a dozen pro-nuclear bills moving through state legislatures. In recent years, we've seen 10 times more action in states and more than 100 bills supporting nuclear. So that's at the state level within the US. At the federal level, we're seeing strong bipartisan support in a divided Congress. If you're watching the news, we're just coming out of an election cycle in the US, and one of the things that we do see is unified support in our Congress for nuclear as an indispensable tool to drive down emissions, and we can see this really through support for bills like the recent Inflation Reduction Act that was passed in the US, as well as the historic $1.2 trillion infrastructure package that drives investment in the nuclear sector. When we think about some of the incentives in the Inflation Reduction Act, and this is what to me was very interesting, there are tax incentives that are very supportive of clean advanced nuclear energy. There are also a clean electricity PTC that can be used for advanced nuclear. So it's not just a nuclear provision, it's a clean energy provision that focuses on the end result of the provision of clean energy. And it's policies like this that will help drive investment into clean energies, including nuclear energy in the future. President Biden said when he signed this bill that this bill is the biggest step forward for climate ever in the U.S. And at the center of this legislation, if you think about it, is the inclusion of clean, carbon-free nuclear energy and incentives to help create those wins that the Secretary was talking about the policy support for nuclear in the U.S. context going forward. So given time, I'm going to stop there because I think these policies are critically important and we're seeing them all over the world.
Okay, if I could turn to John and then to Sama and then to Eve.
I'll be quick. I just want to say, Carol, I feel very close to you sharing this microphone, which is also a reflection of the U.S.-Canada collaboration, right? So on policy, there's some really promising work that's being done between the U.S. Canada in a whole host of different areas that is worth following, especially around regulatory harmonization when it comes to the new SMR technologies. So there's one policy point, not three, but there's one policy point. I think as we look at these policy issues, we need to consider how we are going to get a harmonization around SMR technologies between nations, and I know that Sama and Eve are working on that. I think in the Canadian context and elsewhere, that also extends to conventional nuclear. Within each nation, there needs to be a modernization of regulatory efforts, so that's an important point. And in the Canadian context as well, it's the regulatory approvals that is certainly a huge bottleneck for our nation and many others. We have to come to terms with how it is that we're going to be able to streamline, if not fast track, the amount of time it takes to license a site and to approve the conditions that are going to allow for a speedy build out of nuclear.
Sama, please.
Yes. Well, I would say that while it is true that we have seen a lot more work on how to implement all these policies, I think that we are still living in a world in which most countries do not have energy policies. Most countries only have climate policies. And if you think about it, climate policies are nothing more than a laundry list of wishes and desires and goals. But there is no actual implementation plan, which is what we are supposed to be doing here, but I don't know that we are really getting there. So there is no actual actionable, pragmatic set of actions and deliverables that are put in place in order to get there. So to me, it's very important to see some of these policies taking place, but frankly, at a global level, we really need to translate these climate policies into energy policies that are number one, bold, and number two, pragmatic and realistic. Because without that, it's not going to be easy for the nuclear industry, for nuclear, to really get the long-term visibility, the financial support that it needs in order to really deploy at the speed and the scale that is needed to really address the climate challenge, the sustainable development challenge, the accessibility of abundant energy challenge that we really have right now.
Thank you, Sama. And Eve.
Yeah, what I wanted to say will pretty be covered by John and Sama, but maybe just to summarize, I think my perspective, what we need to get from policy making, I think we need first a level playing field, it's somehow in the statement that was published today. We need all the carbon to be taken on the same footing when it comes to policies. Do not forget that the final objective is decarbonization. It's not the deployment on one only technology against other. This doesn't make sense. We also need science-based policies. On that, for me, it's clear that, for example, the policy development on hydrogen in Europe is not necessarily going to the right direction, because I think this nonsensical policy of having colors on hydrogen is what it means. It doesn't make sense. We believe, well, what we believe is in carbon content. The carbon footprint of hydrogen should be the only driver. And so it means that today we are already going to the wrong direction on that. People want to focus on green hydrogen. Nobody really knows what it means. But at the end of the day, what is important is how much carbon you need to use to make it being produced. And at the end of the day, what we need is collaboration. It was said already. We need collaboration with decision makers. We need collaboration across the industry. In Europe, particularly, this is nuclear industry is quite fragmented at national level. We need to have Europe-wide initiatives on many things, harmonization, SMRs. We need to make it a really European industry.
Thanks very much, Yves. I can see that we're actually reaching the end of the session, so I want to wrap up with something to see what you're going to do personally about this. This is, as I think Sama mentioned, it's called the Implementation COP. So I'd like to turn to each of you and just give you a couple of minutes to tell me what will you implement when you return from COP27 to enable nuclear to play a greater role in a sustainable and secure low-carbon future? And Sama, could I pose that first to you, please?
Well, so as you know, World Nuclear Association, we've been working with our members and also collaborating with many other organizations and industrial associations around the world to really continue to get policymakers to put in place the policies that are going to incentivize and help accelerate the fast and massive deployment of new nuclear. So in our side, we have a couple of major priorities that we've been working on for a while and we will continue to work. Number one, or number two, or number three, depends on the order. They are all number one to me. Certainly, the issue of finance. As we said before, it is essential that nuclear energy needs to be included, considered an investable asset, and certainly a sustainable asset as we are moving forward with these different taxonomies, different ESG criteria development, these different multinational approaches to disclosing the way in which we produce energy or we produce our products. So it is essential, and this is an area in which we've been working for a while and we will continue to work. And maybe the other one, or another number one, would be continue to work with regulators, governments, and the global nuclear industry in the area of streamlining regulatory and licensing frameworks at a global level. And here again, yes, regulators have a lot of work to do, the industry has lots of work to do, but the role of governments is once again essential to provide the mandate and the resources that are needed for this acceleration and this fast tracking of regulatory processes. And then last but not least, again, my third number one is working together with the industry to really put in place the supply chain that we need to have at a global level. So we are looking to a supply chain that number one is global, and number two can be as cost effective as possible. So we are looking into making sure that nuclear products and nuclear supply chain elements are not exclusive to nuclear. So we can really accelerate, standardize, and mainstream as much as possible. So those are the three things that we are trying to do to support the addition of nuclear energy at the scale and the speed that is needed, really, to really achieve all these very high goals that we all have.
Thanks very much, Sama. Yves, can I turn to you with the same question, please?
Yes, so I think on my side, the conclusion is somehow the same conclusion I could have made before this COP27. We need, as Nucleareurope, we need to talk to get EU institutions on board. And it's challenging. I'm not going to repeat this. We see some good signals anyway. I think on Council side from like-minded countries, we have support. We have more and more support from the European Parliament. So I think we need to get to build on that. And if we want to give some first thought on what should be done at next COP, probably we could try and get some MEPs on board, maybe. We need to also to talk with to the Commission, as I was saying, because for me it's not acceptable to have a full European Energy Day without having nuclear being mentioned. It's still, sorry to say, but we are producing half of the low carbon generation in Europe. So we are the elephant in the room. and the elephant has to be acknowledged at some point of time. So we need to get this. And last but not least, we also need to finalize. That's what we started to do, but we need more allies. We need allies bespoken on nuclear who are ready to speak up and say we need you and say it publicly. If we manage to get this, probably life will be easier at some point of time. And I agree with all what Sama was saying, so I'm not going to repeat.
Thanks very much, Yves. John, if you could give us your perspective, please.
Thank you, Jonathan. So I think I'm going to sort of re-express what Sama and Yves have touched on. But you know, as Yves said earlier in this discussion, the final objective here is decarbonization, right? Whether that is being applied to getting rid of colors around, you know, types of electricity or types of hydrogen that are produced, or recognizing that making decarbonization happen is going to take every single existing technology we have and more conventional nuclear, and every technology that is scaling up right now, whether that's small modular reactors or hydrogen or long-term storage. And you know, it's frustrating to me, especially as someone who's come over from the renewable sector, that all of these technologies are not keeping in mind that the final goal here is decarbonization, and that it's more important than technology tribalism and protecting our own turf. So it's another way of re-expressing what Sama and Eva said, which is coming out of this COP, and we had a discussion about this yesterday, we really need to get these other technologies to start sharing our message that all technologies are needed. There is no silver bullet, and we need to pull together. And the last thing I'd say is all of the technologies here at COP, you know, they have been speaking to their own audiences, and I think nuclear is guilty of the same thing. I think we've spent a lot of time talking to the nuclear industry here, and that's why Sama and Yves mentioned that as we go into next year, it's time to start expanding our discussions to be sitting shoulder to shoulder with other technologies and other sectors that are going to be adopting all of these technologies. And so I think that will be a big drive for us going into COP28.
Thanks very much, John. And Carol, in our last minute, can I please give you the last word?
Sure. I think John read most of my notes sitting here because he said a number of the things that I would have highlighted. But I agree with Sama on financing and the comments on regulatory efficiency, the comments on focusing on implementation. And so I'd like to focus my final comment really on what John said, which is expanding the conversation. And that conversation is about decarbonization. It's about how nuclear fits across energy technologies and in partnership with other energy technologies to achieve our ultimate goal of reliable, affordable, resilient, and carbon-free energy generation. I think as I look forward to the coming year, leaving COP, and what will I do when I get back to Washington, I'll be thinking about ways that we can work with our member organizations in the US and abroad and our partners internationally to really meet this moment and address the challenges that are before us as we seek to really play the role that nuclear can play in decarbonizing our energy systems and providing energy access for countries that need to provide energy services to begin with. So that would be, I think, when I go back to the office, what I think about is how do we work more closely together to be a part of the solution as opposed to just focusing on that technology tribalism that John mentioned. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Carol. And with that, the event has to draw to a close, finish on time. So I'd like to thank, first of all, Secretary Granholm for kindly coming and giving us her views earlier on in the event. I'd like to thank everybody here at COP27 for your attention. I'd like to thank those of you who are watching online now or in the future for your attention too. But finally, I'd like to thank Yves, Sama, Carol and John for your brilliant insight and excellent comments. Will you please join me in thanking them?